So let me start. On behalf of Homi Kharas and myself, let me welcome you to this event that we're hosting. And it's a privilege for both Brookings and the Center for Global Development to be co-hosting this event today, where we have a conversation with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, whom I guess I don't really need to introduce to almost anybody in this audience, but I should say that that Ngozi has had an extraordinary professional career, both in the international system, in the World Bank in particular, where we all worked together at various times, and then in Nigeria, in her own country, and where she has served twice as the finance minister and once, and I remember that, as foreign minister as well. So we keep saying that the finance ministry and the foreign ministry don't come together enough, but here you are. And I should also say that she is, I think, probably the only person that I can think of now who is also a distinguished visiting fellow at both Brookings and CGD. So Ngozi is basically the builder of bridges. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't put your phones on silent yet, now's a good moment to do that. Please feel free to live tweet using hashtag CGD Talks, and also to remind you that when we finish this conversation, we are going to have an opportunity for those of you who are interested to get a copy of Ngozi's book, a signed copy, I should say, of Ngozi's book, and Ngozi will be outside signing copies for you. We want to sort of spend the time we have having a conversation. Tommy and I will try to have a conversation first with Ngozi, and then really to open it up to all of you. And I see many friends here, and I want to particularly recognize Julia Gillard, who's sitting here, and also Nick Stern, both friends of the work that we are trying to discuss today. So, Ngozi, Homi and I actually had a conversation to prepare for this.
Oh, really?
Yes, it just shows you.
That makes me nervous.
And we thought we'd kind of divide up this conversation into sort of three big chunks, and then we'll deviate from it. So the first part is really try and get a little bit of a discussion about the nature of the corruption that you were dealing with, and in some ways, how one defines it, how the expectation of what is and isn't corruption might vary from place to place, and how you kind of have common norm. And then we thought we would talk a little bit about the efforts to deal with it, different ways in which you can address corruption. And then finally, I think we thought we might talk a little bit about the personal dimension, because for me, the most moving part of this book has really been the description about how we tend to think of this as a sort of institutional phenomenon, a professional phenomenon, but actually it has very deep personal dimension to it, and dealing with that, and what advice you have to all other brave finance ministers who want to tackle that topic, and in terms of how to prepare for some of the personal attacks and the personal consequences that follow from it. So if that's kind of broadly okay, then we'll open it up. Maybe I'll ask Homi to kind of, would you like to lead off?
Start off? Okay. Thanks, Masood. So, Ngozi, I mean, in the book you talk about different types of corruption. You talk about grand corruption and political corruption and administrative corruption. And maybe you can just start by saying a few words about which kind of corruption, when you first went, you found most tricky and difficult to tackle. What was your priority? Was it just all of the above, and you saw it everywhere and wanted to go on a multi-front agenda? I think it would really help, because all of these things seem to have quite different types of intervention points for you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me first say how delighted and excited I am to be here. Thanks to you, Homi and Masood, for doing this, and to all the friends for coming so early in the morning on Friday. I also want to recognize Seth Berkeley, the CEO of Gavi, who is here from Geneva, Natasha. So thank you all for being here. So many good friends. It's this book, as I say, when you look at it, was not an easy one to write. It was actually not the book I intended to write. But what I wanted to show was that, one, give a sense of hope that we can't throw up our hands when we're dealing with corruption, be it the grand type, be it the whatever type, be it the political, administrative, but that we must, because those who are responsible in the system for these types of corruption want you to give up. You know, they want to make it difficult for people to act. And so showing that there are actually some things we can do that can begin to have an impact on blocking leakages from the system. That was one of the objectives. And, you know, there are various types. I mean, we like to, in the literature, categorize these types. And what I try to show in the book is that all these various types existed. Grand corruption, hijacking state resources for private use. This is not, it's existed over time. There's a book on Nigeria called This Present Darkness. I don't know how many of you have seen that book. It's a real dark book about Nigeria's history with this. And it's not just Nigeria. I think it's very topical because other countries, South Korea, Brazil, Malaysia, you know, so many other countries at this point in time are dealing with this problem of, especially countries that are natural resource based, seem to have difficulty with having transparency in the way that such state resources from the natural resource sector are managed. And so I thought that that was the most difficult area and issue. But there we had some problems because there were very few instruments that the Ministry of Finance, where I was head, could use, because people both abroad and in Nigeria do not know that the Ministry of Finance is actually not involved in the day-to-day management of the oil resources. It's a recipient. It's at the end. So everything that happens in terms of the, you know, the extraction, the sale, and the marketing has nothing to do with the ministry. The ministry receives resources. What we do is we project for the budget how much it is we are going to need from these resources to finance the budget. And we agree with the Ministry of Petroleum, you know, what the production numbers are likely to be. And, you know, we look at what the average price is going to be, and then we try to, we put in this fiscal rule that enables us to delink the price at which we budget from the market price. This is new, started in 2003-04 when I first became finance minister under President Obasanjo to help us manage the very bad volatility that was besetting the system so we could save during good times and use that during difficult times. So these are all the ways that the Ministry of Finance is involved, but we're not involved in actually dealing with the oil resources. And so when people sit, and you know, it's frustrating because how much can you then do in terms of controlling that? But what was important is that whatever came into the budget then, we had to make sure that from that perspective, what we had to manage, we made sure that we tried to minimize the leakages from that. But we were also not silent, even on those things on which we had no control, because at the first time we set up, you know, an oil unit within the Ministry of Finance for the first time, and it was led by Dr. Bright Okogu, who became the Director General of the Budget. I thought he would be here this morning. And he led it, and the idea was to see how we could indeed, you know, get the Ministry of Finance more involved. The permanent secretary of the ministry was on the board of the petroleum, but that didn't confer much power and energy. So if you want to say which was the most difficult, that was because we didn't have any direct instruments to really deal with that level. Then once we got the money, got to the budget, then it became the difficult parts were, one, what the political issues, dealing with the legislature and trying to make sure lower the amount of interference on the budget and on the projects and on the capital budget in particular, and trying to make sure that resources were not only not non-transparently used, but also inefficiently used, because part of that was, sort of putting in projects that had not really been evaluated, some of which would become white elephants, and so on and so forth. And then the administrative type, I describe in terms of, I think people find this very interesting, areas where you had things like people introducing additional workers onto the payroll, simply because you didn't have a system that accounted for the number of civil servants within the country. And that's how we got the ghost workers phenomenon that has been pernicious. So that kind of administrative diversion. So, and then we were paying, initially when I joined in 2004, we were paying ministries transferring resources in cash. So they'd give us a payroll number at the end of every month and say we have 6,000 people in the Ministry of Agriculture of this land. We transfer the resources. And of course, that gives you room to add the next month as, people on the payroll. So we had to change that whole system by building some systems, processes, and institutions. And that's where, one, the idea of a biometric system for all civil servants, to be able to identify opening their own account so you can pay directly. The integrated payroll and personnel management system. And then the government integrated financial management system, the GIFMIS, which enabled us to electronically transfer resources between Treasury and the various ministries. The Treasury single account, which enabled us to import the capital budgets into the central bank, open accounts, and we did all of that and then started with the recurrent budget. These are very boring things, whenever I talk about this, people's eyes glaze over, GIFMIS and IPIS and TSA, all these are not sexy things when you're talking about fighting corruption. But what we try to show is that they are the bedrock. If you don't have these systems, you can say all you wish. It's lovely to capture people and disgrace them in the newspapers, sometimes eventually jail them or not, depending on the circumstances. But at the end of the day, when a new crop of people come in and the system is still not strong, you're courting corruption. So
I think that gives us now a lot of stuff to get into. But before getting into the discussion of what are the ways in which you can tackle it, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, so you arrive, you have a sense of the things that you see all these areas where you think money is being misused or misappropriated, and you need to build some consensus around this, because the technical dimensions, you've got all these instruments you can use, but of course in many countries the reason those systems aren't in place is because people don't want them to be in place. They want to actually have an ability. Did you find that when you start talking to your colleagues about this corruption, that there was a general immediate agreement saying, yes, absolutely, there's a problem here, got to fix it? Or did you actually think that there were people, or was it the case that some people would sort of say, look, we need this to keep the machinery of government going, that in the greater good, this is how our system works? Did you have to battle a little bit this sense of this is how the system works, and you've just got to work within it?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying that it's totally unacceptable to say this is how the system works. So anyone who would say that the system is not supposed to work that way, so that was not a non-starter, and I think people knew they couldn't say that to me. So no, that was not it. But I think to make headway, you had to have a leader, the president, who would back what you were trying to do. One, you needed to have a team, that believed in what you were trying to do and would back in battling. This is not something you do alone.
Yes.
So even though when people write, but if you read the book, you see I mention very often the team, the economic management team that supported the work, the team in the Ministry of Finance, and these are people who also suffered alongside me. So I think the first time I was minister, President Obasanjo certainly saw the need for these reforms and backed the fact that we went to the World Bank to implement all these systems. It took 10 years. And it was with the support of a World Bank credit of about 76 million to help us put the systems together. And when I left, things slowed down a bit for the reasons you said, because there were people within the system, vested interests. Of course, if you're putting in 4 or 5 ghost workers whose monies you're going to have at the end of the month, it's not in your interest for this system to be implemented. So there were, yes, people visibly within the system fighting against its implementation. And it was very, very interesting to see that some of the ministries that were a bit resistant at the time were not the ones you would think about. Of course, the military opted out because they said of the biometric and other types of systems, because they said it would be a security issue. The police were about to opt out the second time I was minister, but luckily the president hadn't signed, but I'm not sure that even till today it's all done. I don't think it is. The Ministry of Health fought against it because they said they had all these temporary doctors, and they didn't know how to account for them within the system. And we said we could devise a means. And the Ministry of Education. So some of the ministries with the biggest numbers of staff were the ones, but they were not the ones you typically think, right, would be resisting, but they were. So yes, you had vested interests within the system that were really not keen on having it done. But there were also groups of people within the system who formed a bit of a critical mass to help push some of the reforms forward. And then the support from above, from the 2 presidents that I worked with, was very instrumental.
It's actually also really interesting. You talk in the book quite a lot about the governors of the states. In Nigeria is it's a federal country. Lots of money goes directly down to lower levels, and we often think about that as actually being an area where there are fewer controls because they don't have all of these systems, etc. But in your case, it seems as if the governors really supported you with the certainly the reforms on the oil side and getting rid of the oil subsidies, etc. And in return, you supported them with constituency projects, I think you called them.
No, I think it was, just to correct, it was the legislature.
Oh, the legislature that
who
had the
constituency
projects.
But on the side of the governors, we have very deep fiscal decentralization in Nigeria, and it's written into the constitution. Once the constitution says that all monies that come into the coffers should be divided on a monthly basis, and the states of the shares and local government should be given to them, and the governors have control. And you really don't have the right to ask them. There are no strong means of accountability for these resources within the Constitution. So that poses a problem, because whilst you may have this fiscal decentralization, the autonomy and independence within the country, but you have one economy. And if we're not all acting in concert, and then the Constitution says in Section 16 that the federal government should manage the economy to the interests of Nigerians. So we try to say that this section that pushes the federal government to manage the economy in the interest of the people should override Section 162 that says that the resources should be shared immediately. So it was always a tension. So I'm not sure that they would agree that we were friends. I'm sure they would not. Because, the insistence on when we first started publishing the revenues, in 2005 or so in the newspaper, this was new. But it came out of the fact that I would visit a state and people were so hostile when I was initially a finance minister. And this was very strange to me. And they were hostile because sometimes teachers hadn't been paid, health workers had not been paid. And they were told that it was because the federal government had not released the state's money that month. So they were very hostile. And when I started finding this out, so I went to the president and I said, this is what is happening. We have to have some transparency in this so that people actually know what their state governments are getting. Could we publish this in the paper? And he agreed to do that. This is under President Obasanjo. So we started, and it brought a lot of hostility. Because of course, then people could say, oh, my state got this amount this month. Mm-hmm. But it was so popular, we loaded it on the websites of the budget office, the ministry, and started publishing it as booklets and books. And I called it the most boring bestseller because people were, it was very popular. Now we have a better, we now have an NGO called Budget that does all the analysis and makes a view. That this is fantastic. I just wanted to show, it's called, they now do a report called State of the States. And then they do all these charts and graphs that now transparently show everything the states are doing. This is from Budget. But when we started, there was no such thing. So we were a precursor to having this. This is a kind of very useful work that civil society can strongly do, of putting out objective information that can help with the transparency and anti-corruption fight.
So just on civil society, maybe then, you have a coalition that you build within the government with the broader sort of legislature, governors in varying degrees of enthusiasm. And what was the role that civil society played? This is an example of something they're doing now, but at that time, were you able to draw upon civil society to help, and also the business community? Mm-hmm. So how did they work in this context? Were they helpful? Were they actually happy to some extent with the old system for some of them?
Well, civil society and business, I think, mirror the society they're in, isn't it? So you had some civil society groups that were serious and good and helpful. There was actually a budget group made up of various civil society that used to meet, and we used to meet with them. And then, they would share the information. And I found that so much easier during my first term in office to find more objective civil society groups that were sharing information. Similar with the private sector. The second time around, it was a bit more difficult. I felt like that space, it wasn't really clear now, whether you were dealing with, yes, there were some civil society groups that were very strong, let me say that, like Budget. But there were others that you were not so sure, whether they were non-governmental individuals or non-governmental organizations, i.e., individuals funding organizations. Because sometimes they would come and we would give them information, and they still went out and gave a press conference and said completely the opposite, not based on the information they had received. So it was a mixed bag. And it's really a crying shame because you need civil society to really be above it all, to be able to help expose what is not right, do proper research, not give in to vested interests if you're to move forward. By the way, on the governors, one of the interesting tales that I tell in the book is, I think this is what you are alluding to, on the phase out of the oil subsidy, which we did. I think people are very aware of it during my second term in 2012 and so on. We attempted a phase out of the oil subsidy, which was, taking a substantial chunk. It was amounting almost to 45% of GDP in terms of fiscal resources. And I think Menachem Katz, who used to be the mission, IMF mission leader then,
was just sitting over there.
is just sitting over there, can attest to some of this. So we had to move. But the phase out, we had a plan, which was actually good, which is to hold these public fora to educate the population on what we were trying to do. And we'd had the first one, and it went very well. I think it was in November of 2011. And then we were supposed to do a few more. You know, we had this big thing televised with market women and workers and everybody saying their piece about what they thought was, and there were a lot of myths about who was really benefiting from the subsidies. But in Nigeria, because of distrust of government by the population over time, people feel that these subsidies are the only benefit they get from this oil. So they hold on to them very tight. And persuading them that the well-off people benefit most was very difficult. So we were to do all this education campaign. But all of a sudden, I was actually here on holiday, Christmas holiday, and we were supposed to do more rounds after the holidays. I got a call from a friend saying that the subsidy is about to be phased out in 2 days' time. So, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. So I was in a panic because I thought we are not really ready. Who could have advised the president to do it and announce it at the beginning of the year? Because that was not going to be a good New Year's gift. And so I tried to reach him frantically. It's one of the stories I tell in the book. And I'm always able to reach him, but for some reason, this time, every time I called the number, I was told he's in a meeting, he can't come. Anyway, I never reached him, and it was announced. And of course, I told my husband at the time, I said, you know what? They are going to say it's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. This World Bank, quote unquote, IMF person has come and she's doing all this. And when I got home, you know, and subsequently a lot, and I'm sure many Nigerians here can testify to what I'm saying, practically all the blame for the phase out was in newspapers blasted that it was my doing. And yet I didn't really know what happened and how it happened. But the punchline is later on, 2 or 3 months down the line, we had a National Economic Council meeting with some governors. And one of the governors then, when this was being discussed as to how this happened and all the riots and the demonstrations, and then he admitted, or he said, that it was the governors who pressured the president to do away with it immediately. Why do we have to wait another 3 or 4 months? Let's just do it and get it done. But they did not come forward at the time to own up. And the president, to his credit, President Jonathan, then never mentioned anybody's name. He said he would take full responsibility for what happened. And that was credit worth.
So the book is full of wonderful stories like this about what actually happened. But, you know, you started by saying that a lot of what you did was actually really boring. I mean, all these, you know, institutional developments, the financial management systems and things like that. It's a very different approach to fighting corruption than what we sometimes see in other countries where they try to go after some, you know, individuals who are, you know, recognized in the country as being corrupt, sometimes at high levels, sometimes at low levels. I think in China, Xi Jinping has a campaign of the so-called tigers and flies. So, I mean, you know, they go after the top level and they go after the bottom level. You really didn't do any of that.
Well, let me say this. First, my belief is you need both approaches. Going after people, top and bottom, is necessary because you've got to show there is no impunity. And people who are corrupt should bear the consequences. So I totally believe in that. But it's not enough. Because if you get all those big names, it's fine in a country where the systems are strong. Right. But if your institutions are still very weak, and you know, look, human beings Africans, Nigerians, whoever, they are no more dishonest or honest than people in the US or the UK. Bear with me, I have to say that. If you confronted people in this country or in the US or anywhere with systems that are not there, if you can just add any number of names and collect their salaries, because there is no system to prevent you from doing that, people will. People are people. You know? So there's
Sometimes they're ghosts.
they're ghosts. we joked that we had ghost workers who became ghost pensioners, you know. Went on to collect. So what I'm trying to say is you need both. You really need to build strong institutions. And if your institutions are strong and systems are strong, and these days I believe a lot in technology and the need to deploy technology to help fight corruption. If you can do this, then you make an example of some of those high and low who contravene the system. I think that combination will work. But if you just focus on high-profile announcements, which don't even result in prosecution sometimes, you know, you just have big things in the media and newspapers, and at the end of the day, people don't even see the people in jail. If your judiciary system is not strong enough, that's one of the institutions you need. Right. You need a strong, transparent, non-corruptible judiciary to work so that people feel that they're getting a fair deal when you try them. So you need that. You need your technical systems within your ministries to manage your finances. And you need clear rules of the game so that people know that when they go past this, they are going to pay the consequences. We don't have all of that. And I'm afraid that sometimes in our countries, the attention is diverted with these high-profile announcements. And at the end of the day, the underlying system is still what it is. And I believe that in my country, the underlying system is still not strong enough. So you've got the worst of both worlds. We have to work on those systems. We have to identify them one by one. And then we have to couple that with the punishment. But often the punishment and the announcements are very sexy. That's what I mean by nobody wants to do the non-sexy work. And by the way, the second part of that is I believe corruption can only be fought from the inside with help from the outside.
So can I just pick you up on that point? Because I think that is a really core message from the book. And I want to get a little bit of your sense of, you came from the World Bank, so you knew really very well how the World Bank and the international system function. And having arrived there and trying to embark on this fight, how did you find the role that donors, development partners could play? Where could they be helpful, and where were their efforts actually not helping? And so how can you what's your advice to other people who are trying to embark on this in terms of how best to make use of the international development system to help you in your fight?
The more, having been on both sides, yes. I think this is one of the unique qualities that I now have. You look at it, and the international community means so well many times. But I'm finding more and more a dissatisfaction, because I don't think that trouble is taken to really understand the country they're in and the way the system works. It takes effort. Even with our country offices in some organizations, people still live within their bubble. They don't really understand the society and the system they're working in, and they often fall into false traps. Sometimes I see them captured by the wrong people. And so it's hard to do this. It takes time and years. So it's very easy to just do the lazy thing. That's point one. Point two is the types of things we need to do, building institutions. The multilaterals are prime for that. And as I said, we couldn't have built all those GIFMIS and IPIS without the help of the World Bank, the support of the fund in terms of monitoring, and so on and so forth. So we need them. But they need to really understand what is wrong with the system, what is missing. Two, they need a long-term horizon. So beyond the 5-year loan, you need to understand it's going to take 10 years, and you've got to signal to people that you're going to be around for that long and you're not going anywhere. So we need to change the signals that, look, we're here with you to build this system over the long haul. And then third, you've got to identify the reformers to work with. Are there people within the system who truly believe in change? Is the leadership committed? Because you need them from the inside. If you can't figure out how it really works, can you find people who truly understand the way countries function so you can support them, back them? And then also find ways and means to support them in case they're attacked. That's another thing the international community does not do well. They just don't do it well. We have examples of people who have been whistleblowers on the inside or fighting corruption on the inside, attacked, they run out, they have nowhere to go. I remember the case of Nuhu Ribadu, who was my colleague head of the EFCC, when he had to leave at one time. No money, no place to take his family. If there was a fund or a fellowship that supported people like that, you remember Gitongo from Kenya, when he too had to go, nobody, you know, something was quickly arranged at Oxford.
Yes.
So there's very specific ways, and I try to say a few words about this in the book. Work with people from the inside, get to know who is what. Don't be lazy about it. And focus on building institutions. That's where I really think that the international community, if they can give it a long-term horizon, we are going to be with you for 10 years doing this, or 15 years. We're not going anywhere until we sort out the various institutions needed to block this kind of behavior.
One of the things that you would have imagined that would be quite easy for the international community to do would be to help you recover some of the money that had been taken abroad. You championed that at the World Bank. In the book, you talk about the recovery of some of the money from the Abacha family. Mm-hmm. But the numbers that you talk about there are, 350 million or so, compared to the billions that you document as potentially going missing. Why is that so difficult, do you think, to do? And could it be accelerated? Could more be done on that particular front?
Homi, I think you've hit on a very, very important agenda. I think over time in Nigeria, if you take from the time of 1999, when General Abdul Salami, the president then, and President Obasanjo started working on recoveries and deployed those working with them, I think about 2 billion or more, 1.8 billion, I think I identify in the book, has been recovered. But, estimates are that you still have another 2 or 3 billion out there from the Abacha monies. And during the second time, we 300 and something million. Why is it difficult? This is again where the international community needs to act and has actually improved. But the reluctance to release these monies that are stolen from countries and diverted back to the countries where they belong is amazing. It takes 10 years, 14 years, once you track the resources, to get through all the rules to have this released. And this has been the story in Nigeria, the great difficulty. So when we started, at that time, I must give credit to the president again, for the support and the push to recover some of these monies. But all the rules and regulations and the blockages in the developed countries that do not allow these resources to be released, that has to go, in spite of UNCAC, the UN Conference Anti-Corruption Convention. There are so many legal obstacles in the way. Now, things have improved. The Swiss have worked hard, for instance, to be able to do better on the release of funds. The Channel Islands, the Luxembourg, and various other jurisdictions. But I still feel, and the UK, I still feel it's slow. it could be faster, that there's still many legal obstacles in the way. And I think the role of the World Bank then with the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative in trying to monitor the return of these funds, just to reassure those countries that the money would not be re-looted, as they say in Nigeria. I think that's a critical role that the international community can play. But we need to work on getting these monies released, because the impression that people in the sending countries, the impression they have is that this money lodged in the banks is doing quite well for those who are keeping them, and they're not in any rush to let these resources back.
Right. Okay, I think this is a good moment to invite people in the audience for their questions. I think I would encourage you to, whatever you say is useful if it ends with a question mark. And it's relatively brief so we can have more people in. So I've got, all right, there's a range of people here. So I've got one person who's up in the back first, the gentleman there. Then I've got Nick here, and then I'm going to come to Ferguson. Then I come there, and I'll come to you next. Yeah. So, yeah, please.
Thank you.
Could you identify yourself
yes.
as well, please? Yeah.
Robert Tobiason, formerly with U.S. Treasury, now a trade compliance consultant. So I deal with companies that are trying to move into emerging markets and trying to deal with this issue. Madam Minister, one tool I've been told could be effective in combating corruption is making sure that government salaries are very good in countries, so an individual has an incentive not to be corrupt because he or she will lose a very good job, that they don't want to risk losing a good job. Do you feel that's an effective tool, or what's your experience tell you? Thank you very much.
Shall we take two, three questions then, and then Nick?
Nick Stern, London School of Economics. Thank you very much, Ngozi, for a wonderful book and thoughts just now. I want to ask a question about gender. When, this is old data now, about 13, 14 years ago, when I was at the bank, Beth King and colleagues published a very nice book called Engendering Development. And they showed that wherever you look, women are more likely to repay loans than men. The more women involved in government and governance, the less likely was corruption. If that observation is correct, I'm prepared to believe it's correct that more women in government and governance means less corruption. How do we understand why that's the case, how it happens? What is it about behavior that leads to that result? Because if we could understand that, we might make some progress.
Okay, one more, and then we'll come to Ngozi.
Fergus Drake from Crown Agents. Thank you so much for your overview. Just a quick question about, I completely agree in the long term and building up institutions, but obviously quick wins are really important as well, and kind of initial momentum. And just coming back from Harare last Friday, hearing from our national staff there talking about police aren't shaking people down at roadblocks anymore. Really tangible. And I'm just really interested in how you do meet the processes and the institutional long-term support, as well as things where you're bringing civil society with you.
Okay. Shall we respond to those first?
Yes, on the issue of the salaries, I think it's a very important point. You can do the Singapore model. Of course, it's a small country, but it's a model where you have a very lean and efficient civil service that is very highly paid. And salaries are competitive with the private sector. And I think that really helps. In many of our countries, we have a very substantial civil service, both at the federal level and the state level. And so you have this issue of the affordability, of the wage bill. And the recurrent budget, sometimes, at least at the federal level, you know, you felt was, is this getting out of control? Where you have recurrent expenditures eating up, including, you know, the salary bill and operating, eating up 75% of your budget, leaving you with very little on the capital budget because we've got so many on the payroll. So if you were able to handle that more efficiently, then you could pay people higher. But the downside of that is that, you know, it's enormously, even the civil service rules do not allow you now, you know, to dismiss or, you know, civil servants. I remember the first time during the Obasanjo government, we worked on trying to slim the civil service, and 30,000 people were identified, you know, to be let go from, you know, and people, some of them performance issues and so on. But at the end of the day, when we came back the second time, they were all back. So I do agree. And, you know, people are earning at the lowest grade, you know, grade number 1, step 15. You know, we have this grade, maybe $100 a month. You know, grade level 15, step 15 or whatever, they're earning maybe 600 or 700. You know, so yes, but they have other perks, which you also have to take into account. So maybe if you add in all the perks, you might get to $1,000 a month. But you have to ask yourself whether that is a living wage. So it would be nice to see increases, but they have to come with decreases in numbers, because the fiscal cannot sustain it. And that's what people need to understand. You can't have it both ways. We just don't have the resources to do that. Are people willing to accept a slimmer civil service that is better paid? That would be my recommendation. But if they want a big civil service with everybody in it, then that's the consequence.
Then the next point about
Yes, gender. Yes, there's this, it would be nice to have a really good analytical foundation to support the fact that when women are in control, you have less corruption. I think anecdotal evidence shows that. That's not to say that you don't find cases in my country also, where women are part and parcel of the corruption. So it's very difficult to generalize because there are instances. But generally, I mean, there are instances of that, but it does seem that women are more transparent. And it's so difficult to say this. I hate to say things without the hard data. I'm looking at Julia Gillard here because we are working on something in that direction together. But she's also been a prime minister, so she can tell us. But some of the evidence we have are that women tend to manage finances in a tighter, more efficient way. They tend to have less ego. They tend to be less corrupt, etc., etc. But before we pronounce that this is the case, Nick, I can't cite you many studies, but a lot of anecdotal evidence in that direction. And this is an area in which we really need to do the work so that we can say that maybe for certain types of work and government service, we should have women running these areas because we are going to get better results.
Okay.
And the quick wins. I do agree that when you're embarked on this fight, you need some quick wins. So even though I talked a lot about institutions, I also think you need to identify areas where you can show people, and that's a very good one. The fact that police are no longer in Harare stopping people and extorting money from them is a very big sign to the population that things are changing. So yes, in that fight, you can't just rely on, when you finish building these institutions, because it takes years and years. So what are the quick wins? What is it when you talk to the population? Where do they have the biggest complaints in terms of impact on their daily lives? And if you can change that, like police on the road stopping people, people at demanding money in order to provide, a service that the population needs, if you can act on those immediately, and you can often do something with, if you announce inspections, what if the president decides to pay surprise visits to certain centers, where people are extorting money, sends a sharp signal that this is no longer the case. I think things like that can work.
Make a big difference. There's a lady over there. Yep. She had her hand up first. Yep. Over there, please. Thank you. Yep. And then there's, I think I've got both Nora and Nancy in the back after you. Please.
Good morning. My name is Ifi Bozimo. I'm from the World Bank. Actually, the reason I came here today is to personally say to you, in case you haven't heard or you don't know that, you're one of the most respected people, women that I know, I love very much. But this is to challenge you, Ma. Please, Ma, it's not over. You said in your opening remarks that you don't throw your hands up. You're talking to us, but I was talking back to you. You can't throw your hands up now, Ma. I'm sorry. There's no one that I can think of, because I'm a full Nigerian, and I cry when I think of what's going on. But I haven't seen anyone who is more qualified. And the point you made, just the last point you made in responding to gender, still adds to the point. You're a woman. See, there's no escape. I'm sorry, but we have to find a way to do this. You are the most qualified person that I can think of. I'm not trying to butter you up. It's the truth. It's what most people feel. It's the truth. Find a way to get back there, Ma. Find a way. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
All right. There's a message for you.
Oh my God.
Okay.
It didn't end with a question.
I think on this occasion we'll make.
What's the way?
Yeah. For this one, we'll make the exception. Nora.
Thank you. We can start the campaign. Ngozi for president.
Okay. Now we'll have a question. Back to the ending with the question. Yes.
All right. Congratulations.
Thank you, Nora. Thanks for
I
coming.
am Nora Lustig. I'm a professor at Tulane University and also a non-resident fellow here at CGD. And about 15 years ago, I took the challenge of being president of a private university in Mexico. And I found lots of corruption. So corruption not only happens in public sector, it also happens maybe in nonprofits. I don't know what it's called in the for-profit world. And one of the things that struck me is that people did not think they were committing corruption. Yes. They thought it was an entitlement because they were not getting paid enough. So when you confronted them, why are you doing this? Everybody had like a little business on the side. We were the, best stimulator of micro-enterprise in the state of Puebla, I think. This was in Mexico. So what do you do with the cultural, it's a cultural identity that people have in the, they think I'm not doing something wrong. I'm getting what I'm entitled to, and the system is not providing me. And that is what I found most difficult to fight, because it's so entrenched. And when you start fighting, then people, instead of being on your side, they are saying, why are you taking away what it's mine? So that, just...
Thank you. What's the fine line between a perk and corruption? Yes. And Nancy, please.
Yes, how do we get you back to Nigeria? Actually, I wanted to ask, I'm disappointed not to hear, because of the questions and the excitement and all of your great answers, a little bit more about your sense of the personal costs you've endured because of what you did and have been doing since in Nigeria. And your, how much difference did it make that you had a home to come to? You mentioned Nuhu Ribadu, and I remember you personally making phone calls to help him deal with the need for him to find a place to land. You never personally faced in the same way that risk. So anything you can tell us about sort of the price you've paid, what's come out of your gut for what you've been doing and have done, and the price you would face if you were induced to go back.
All right, I'll just take one more, and that's, I think, Sanjay in the front here.
Thanks. Sanjay Pradhan from the Open Government Partnership, and Ngozi is our global ambassador of the 75-country partnership. Just picking up on Nancy's point, we've talked about, Homi asked, and we've talked about the institutional dimensions of fighting corruption. You've also referred to the role of external partners, civil society and donors. But the part on fighting corruption that comes through from your book, and I must thank you for an advance copy, it's riveting stuff, is the leadership that you showed. It's the commitment that you showed. And to pick up on what Nancy said, your mother was kidnapped, they were trying to maim you, they were trying to harm you. And it's this dimension of fighting corruption. Corruption is fought from the inside, but it's fought from very courageous people who are taking extraordinary risks. So the question I had was, what is it that sustained you in this fight personally, Ngozi? Because in the Open Government Partnership, we have 75 countries, they're courageous reformers. But how do we give them a message when their mothers are kidnapped, when they are going to be at risk? What is it that sustained you? What's your message for those who face those difficult challenges?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you. Nora, on your question about corruption as entitlement and is it cultural? My answer to this is that you may not like it, Nora, but I don't think it's cultural. I think it's people bending culture to make themselves feel like they're not doing something wrong. So they may have a cultural tradition, which they then bend to explain why they're doing something. Because I'm trying to see a culture in which people support you doing something that is not transparent and straightforward. That's what corruption is about. When you hide, when you do something harmful to others, there's no culture that supports that. But there are cultural things like, let me just take one. You mentioned one of people doing little businesses on the side and they're not paid enough. Yes, and they are not paid enough. We talked about that, and I agree that low salaries and the inability to get compensated are certainly a factor. And we need to think of how to handle it in our countries. But then, to go from there saying, I'm not paid enough, therefore it's okay if, I take a little bit of money here to start a business so I can earn more. It's okay if, there's another thing. At home, if you get a job, many people in your village and your extended family will wonder why they're not all being hired, right? And I remember people saying to me, in my village, my husband's village, they just thought I was really useless. Because at some point, not enough people were getting into jobs. They expect that. They expect that you help your family, your extended family, your village, your clan to do this. And you can do some of that within the rules of the game, which is to point them to where are jobs being advertised. Go and compete. I can certainly recommend you, but I'm not going to override the system and just put you in. So you try to find a way to do the right thing without being corrupt. So I don't think, I'm not one of those, maybe I'm wrong, who subscribes to a cultural dimension, because I just don't believe that corruption is inherent in any culture. And anyone who claims that, to me, is using culture to perpetrate something that is not correct. So I think we can debate it, Nora. but that's my belief. So I don't buy that, because a lot of people want to say, well, in our culture, we're supposed to help all our relatives and we're supposed to help our village. So does that mean that then you employ everybody from there to the neglect of others? The answer is no. Then the second thing is, and I want to, sorry, before I go, you made a very important point, Nora, which I want to emphasize, which is corruption is not only in the public sector. The private sector in many of our countries has the same elements. You know, you look at our banks and our banking system, you look at some of our companies, you find all these practices. So it's not a public sector prerogative, and we really need to work for both sides. Then on the personal costs, just to you know, I have two of my siblings are here in the audience, my husband and my son, and they can maybe be best placed. It's very emotional for me. We paid a high personal cost. It wasn't just me alone. Even people working with me, my special assistants, who were not even given jobs after. Some of them were told, you worked with us, so we are not going to employ you. Some were victimized. You know, my family paid a very high cost. And therefore, when you're doing that, when your mother at 83 gets kidnapped, and I'll never stop talking about it. I will never, because it was the worst nightmare of my life. And when your mother overhears people talking about how are they going to dispose of her body, she overheard the people asking someone at the other end of the line, what thing we go do with him body? So somebody was giving them instructions on how they should dispose of her body. And this is my mother is a retired professor of sociology. So she's somebody who is schooled. It was terrifying. And if you mention it to her today, she begins to shake. We can't talk about it with her. She's still alive. But if you see her and you say, do you remember what happened? She starts shaking. That to me was a huge, huge cost. Then the attempts that were made to attack me, myself, which you read of in the book, physically harm me. Well, for me, I was less worried. But the thought that my relatives could be attacked at any time was horrible. So it was not easy. When that didn't happen, then they tried to damage my reputation. And you know what corrupt people do? Some of them hide behind others to do the attacks. But when they have a chance, they try to describe you as themselves. They accuse you of the same thing they are guilty of. And so they did try to do so much extensive reputational damage. You know, I hijacked $1 billion. And I always joke to people, when my husband saw that headline, he asked me why he's still paying a mortgage. Why aren't we on a yacht? You know, where have I kept this money that I've hijacked? And my father actually asked me the same. You know? So they try to do reputational damage. And here is where I have to say thanks to the international community, Sanjay. You asked me, how did you withstand it? I withstood it because I had Nick Stern is here, you know, who endorsed the book. Homi Masood, there's so many friends. Internationally, people were behind me and saying, we know you're not like that. You've been with us for 25 years, 30 years. We know what you're capable of. There were some in the international community who may have, you know, thought it was true or not true. I don't really care. 90% of people were behind me. And what I say is that's extraordinary, that I had that luck. What of others who didn't have an international career? What if I'd not spent 25 years at the World Bank and so many leaders? And you cannot believe, I'm very grateful to many African leaders, presidents who reached out to me to tell me, hang in there, we're behind you. You know, so it's that kind of support. You need to signal to people who are trying to fight that, by the way, there are people out here who believe in what you're doing. And we are going to support you. And if you need to come out, we have a fellowship at the OGP or, or at Brookings or CGD. I'm determined to keep fighting for this kind of fund that will establish a kind of whistleblowers fellowship or something, so that people in that position know that they can come out and be able to live and not be subjected. Because when they think you have no safety net, then they'll destroy you. And this book that I've written will not be without consequences. You will see what will happen when people read it. The attacks will start. They already started. I'll tell you one of the newspapers, Sahara reporters, when they saw the book, they wrote Ngozi the Untouchable. And then they put in the middle, and they said she's written a book, and they quoted, the description of the, and then in the middle they put this video. Guess what's in the video? If you open it, you will see all the accusations of me. She stole $1 billion. She did this, she did that. They video taped all those accusations and put them in the middle so that whoever reads Ngozi the Untouchable will now see this video. If you click on it, you will now see all the accusations of things I've done. That's Sahara reporters, for those who follow. So you know who are the people behind that kind of thing. And they will continue to attack, But I want to end on the optimistic note that they've attacked before, they didn't get anywhere. I want to say a special thank you to my family. The international community was important. My family was wonderful. They're here, my sisters and brothers. I want to recognize them. Njide and Chichi and all of you in the Okechukwu in the audience. My husband is here. He came back.
Yes. Yeah.
My son Okechukwu. They were amazing. They were unshakable. They were with me every inch of the way. They cracked jokes. They sent support, they prayed, whatever they needed to do to keep me going. So if you want to know how I survive, have a strong family that believes in what you're doing, have a strong support somewhere, the international community that was so wonderful to me. But let's have an institutionalized instrument, because not everybody can count on this international. If they don't have the reputation that I had made before, they might not have the support. So let's build something. Will you help to do that?
All right. There are still people who had questions, but I thought that was such a powerful statement, Ngozi, that you just made, that with the permission of the people who had been waiting to ask questions, I was going to say this is a very good point at which to end. So I'd like to just invite all of you to join Hobby and me in thanking Ngozi for really what has been a fascinating conversation. Great.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. If you would like to purchase a book or have it signed, you can exit out that back door behind you on your left, the glass door, and we will see you again next time. Thanks so much.